Enjoy! Shadows Unbound, A Mother's Fight for Justice, by Lea von Löwenstein. Chapter 1, The Veil of Deception. Lea stood in front of the cracked mirror in her small apartment, her fingers trembling as they adjusted the lace veil over her head. The delicate fabric brushed against her cheek, a soft whisper against her skin that felt like a taunt. The reflection staring back at her seemed like a stranger, polished and demure, the perfect image of a bride. Yet behind her dark eyes lay a storm of doubt and resolve. The scent of jasmine tea wafted through the room, an offering from Hannah, her best friend and confidant, who stood behind her with a furrowed brow. "Lea, I'm going to ask you one more time," Hannah said, her voice low but urgent. "Are you sure about this? You don't have to do it. There has to be another way." Lea turned from the mirror, her movements deliberate as she smoothed the folds of her ivory dress. The fabric was smooth beneath her hands, a tangible reminder of the part she had to play. "This isn't about me, Hannah," she said softly, her voice steady but carrying a weight that filled the room. "It's about the people I can protect if I do this. Jianmin's circle, his connections. This is the only way I'll get close enough to uncover the truth." Hannah's brows knit tighter. "You're putting yourself in the lion's den, Lea. Do you even know what kind of man he really is?" "I know enough," Lea replied, her gaze drifting to the open window. A cold breeze fluttered the curtains, carrying with it the distant hum of traffic and the faint scent of rain. "I know he's ruthless. I know his family is powerful. And I know that if I don't do this, more women will suffer under men like him." Hannah sighed, her hands gripping Lea's shoulders. "Just promise me one thing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If it ever gets to be too much, you'll get out. You'll leave and never look back." Lea met Hannah's gaze, her eyes dark and unwavering. "I promise." The car waiting outside was sleek and black, its windows tinted to obscure the world within. Lea stepped into the cool leather interior, her heart pounding against her ribcage like a drumbeat of defiance. The driver nodded politely but said nothing as the car pulled away from the curb. As the city blurred past the windows, Lea's mind raced with 100 fleeting thoughts. The scent of leather, mixed with the faint trace of Hannah's jasmine tea, still clinging to her. She had trained for years to be calm under pressure, to keep her emotions in check, no matter the danger. But this felt different. This wasn't a mission with a clear endpoint. This was stepping into the unknown. The courthouse loomed ahead, its grey stone facade imposing against the overcast sky. Jianmin was waiting for her on the steps, his tailored suit and easy smile painting the picture of a successful, charismatic lawyer. He held out his hand as she approached, and Lea took it, her grip firm despite the tremor she felt in her core. "You look beautiful," Jian said, his voice smooth and practiced. There was no warmth in his tone, only the carefully constructed charm of a man who always got what he wanted. "Thank you," Lea replied, her own voice controlled and measured. The words felt foreign on her tongue, as if they belonged to someone else. The ceremony was quick, a perfunctory exchange of vows before a small group of witnesses. The judge's voice droned on, the legal jargon blending with the faint rustling of papers and the occasional cough from the audience. Lea's focus was razor-sharp, her senses heightened. The faint scent of cologne on Jian's suit, the weight of the ring sliding onto her finger, the murmurs of approval from the small crowd. When it was over, Jian leaned in to kiss her cheek, his lips cool and impersonal against her skin. "Welcome to the family," he said, his voice low and edged with something she couldn't quite place. The reception was equally muted, a gathering of Jian's colleagues and family members in a sterile, high-rise banquet hall. The food was artfully arranged, the champagne flowed freely, but the atmosphere was cold, like the smile plastered on Madame Wu's face. Jian's mother was an imposing woman, her sharp eyes scanning Lea as if she were a document to be scrutinized. "You're quiet," Madame Wu said, her voice clipped. "I hope you understand the expectations of being a Min now. There's no room for weakness in this family." Lea met the older woman's gaze, her spine straightening. "I understand," she replied simply, her tone betraying nothing. Later, as she stood by the large windows overlooking the city, Jian approached her with 2 glasses of champagne. "You did well today," he said, handing her a glass. His tone was almost dismissive, as if she were a subordinate who had completed a task. My mother approves, for now. Lea took the glass, the cool stem of the flute pressing against her fingers. That's all that matters, isn't it? She replied, the hint of irony in her voice lost on him. Jian smirked, sipping his drink. Exactly. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Lea found herself standing alone by the grand doors. The air outside was crisp and carried the faint scent of rain-soaked pavement. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over her. This is just the beginning, she whispered to herself, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. You can do this. When Jian came to collect her, his hand resting lightly on her lower back as they left together, Lea stepped forward without hesitation. Her mask was firmly in place and her resolve was unshakable. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it, for the women she had sworn to protect, for the justice she sought, and for the quiet promise she had made to herself, to never lose who she truly was. Chapter 2: A Fragile Beginning. The house was larger than Lea had imagined, an imposing structure with high walls and tall iron gates that seemed more like a fortress than a home. As the car pulled up the long driveway, the crunch of gravel beneath the tires resonated in the still evening air. Jian sat beside her, scrolling through his phone, his attention already far from the woman he had married just hours ago. You'll get used to it, he said casually, without looking up. Lea glanced at him, but said nothing. Her gaze shifted to the house, its tall windows glowing faintly with warm light. She wondered if the warmth was only a facade, a reflection of the image Jian's family wanted to project to the world. Inside, the scent of fresh-cut flowers filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of polished wood and something else, something cold and clinical, like disinfectant. The grand entryway was lined with marble floors, and a crystal chandelier hung above them, refracting the light into sharp, fragmented patterns that danced across the walls. Madame Wu greeted them at the door, her posture as rigid as the pearls adorning her neck. Her sharp eyes flicked over Lea's appearance, assessing her like one might a new acquisition. "Welcome home," Madame Wu said, her tone polite but devoid of warmth. She turned to Jian. "Everything has been prepared. I trust you'll settle her in." Jian nodded, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Mother, if you'll excuse us." Madame Wu gave a tight smile before retreating up the grand staircase, her heels clicking against the marble in precise, measured steps. Jian led Lea through the house, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "You'll spend most of your time here," he said, gesturing to the living room. It was expansive and luxurious, with plush furniture and heavy drapes that blocked out the world beyond. Yet despite its elegance, the room felt stifling, as though the walls were closing in. "I'll show you the rest tomorrow," Jian added, his voice curt. "You must be tired." Lea nodded, masking the unease that churned within her. "Yes, it's been a long day." He led her upstairs to the master suite, a space as grand as the rest of the house but strangely impersonal. The king-size bed was neatly made with crisp white linens, and the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, likely from the sachets tucked into the drawers. "This is your room," Jian said, his tone flat. He paused at the doorway, his hand resting on the frame. "I have work to finish tonight. Sleep well." Without waiting for a response, he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Lea stood in the center of the room, the silence pressing down on her like a heavy weight. She walked to the window and pushed aside the thick curtains, revealing a view of the garden below. The neatly trimmed hedges and perfectly arranged flowers seemed artificial, too perfect to be real. Her hands clenched the fabric of the curtains as she took a deep breath, her chest tightening with the weight of her decision. This wasn't a home. It was a stage, and she was an actress in a play that Jian and his family had orchestrated. Yet she reminded herself why she was here. Somewhere beneath the layers of opulence and pretense, there were secrets to uncover. Secrets that could save lives. She turned away from the window, her gaze falling on the bedside table where a small photograph frame stood. It was a picture of Jian with Madame Wu and his younger sister, Rui, their smiles frozen in time. The image felt hollow, like everything else in this house. Lea slipped off her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, the cool fabric of the duvet brushing against her fingertips. Her mind drifted to Hannah's words earlier that day. "If it ever gets to be too much, you'll get out." Her lips pressed into a thin line. It was already too much. But leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. For now, she would play her part. She would observe, she would learn, and when the time came, she would strike. With a final glance at the closed door, Lea lay back on the bed, staring up at the ornate ceiling. The faint hum of the house's central air system was the only sound, a reminder of the silence she would have to endure here. She closed her eyes, her breathing steadying as she let herself sink into the quiet determination that had carried her through years of training and missions. This was just another mission, and like all the others, she would see it through to the end. Chapter 3: Shattered Illusions. The morning sunlight filtered through the heavy drapes, casting long golden streaks across the bedroom floor. Lea stirred from a restless sleep, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. For a moment, she lay still, her thoughts a tangle of uncertainty and resolve. The silence of the house felt unnerving, broken only by the faint hum of distant footsteps. She rose from the bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet, and moved toward the window. Pushing the curtains aside, she was greeted by the meticulously groomed garden below, its symmetry unnerving in its perfection. A soft knock at the door startled her. Before she could respond, the door creaked open, revealing a young maid holding a tray of breakfast. The woman's gaze stayed firmly on the floor, her movements hurried but careful. "Good morning, ma'am," the maid said in a quiet voice. "I've brought your breakfast." She placed the tray on a small table by the window and quickly exited the room without waiting for acknowledgement. Lea watched her leave, her mind cataloguing the maid's timid demeanor and rushed movements. There was something unsettling about the way the staff seemed to move through the house, as if afraid of being noticed. Downstairs, the dining room was already alive with the faint clatter of dishes and subdued conversation. Lea stepped into the room to find Jian seated at the head of the table, scanning the news on his tablet. Madame Wu sat beside him, sipping tea with calculated grace. "Good morning," Lea said, her voice calm and neutral. Jian looked up briefly, offering a nod before returning to his tablet. Madame Wu, however, fixed her with a scrutinizing gaze that lingered a moment too long. "You're awake earlier than I expected," Madame Wu said, setting her teacup down with a soft clink. "I trust you slept well?" Lea offered a polite smile. "I did, thank you." Madame Wu's lips curved slightly, though it lacked any warmth. "Good. You'll need your energy. There are responsibilities in this household that you'll be expected to take on." Jian, without lifting his eyes from the screen, added, "Mother's right. You'll need to adjust quickly. This isn't a place for idleness." Lea bit back a sharp reply, instead nodding demurely. "Of course, I'll do my best." The first real clash came that afternoon. Lea had ventured into Jian's office, a sprawling room filled with dark wood furniture and shelves lined with leather-bound books. She wasn't there to pry, at least not overtly. But the faint smell of tobacco and the disarray on his desk hinted at a side of Jian she hadn't yet seen. As she ran her fingers along the spines of the books, Jian stormed in, his presence filling the room like a thundercloud. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and cutting. Lea turned to face him, her expression calm. "I was just familiarizing myself with the house. I didn't realize your office was off-limits." "It is," Jian snapped, stepping closer. His eyes, usually cold and distant, now burned with a controlled fury. "You don't belong here." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. Lea held her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. "Understood. It won't happen again." Jian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He turned his back to her, his movements rigid, and began organizing the papers on his desk. As Lea left the office, her mind raced. Jian's reaction was disproportionate, almost panicked. Whatever he was hiding in that room, it was something worth protecting. That evening, the family gathered for dinner, the table set with an array of dishes that looked more like art than food. The atmosphere was stifling, each word exchanged carefully measured. Madame Wu dominated the conversation, her sharp voice slicing through the silence. while Jian remained distant, his focus elsewhere. Lea observed them closely, her senses attuned to every detail. The faint tap of Madame Wu's manicured nails against her wineglass, the way Jian's gaze flickered toward his phone whenever it buzzed, the subtle tension that hung in the air like an invisible thread ready to snap. "You're quiet tonight," Madame Wu remarked, her tone laced with condescension. "I prefer to listen," Lea replied smoothly. "You learn more that way." Madame Wu's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing further. Jian glanced at Lea, his expression unreadable, before returning to his meal. Later that night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, Lea sat by the window in her room, staring out at the moonlit garden. The events of the day replayed in her mind. The maid's nervous demeanor, Jian's anger in the office, Madame Wu's veiled barbs. This family was a web of secrets and control, and she had only begun to unravel its threads. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "If they think they can intimidate me, they're wrong," she whispered to herself, the words a quiet vow. For the first time since stepping into this house, she felt a flicker of hope. Beneath the layers of wealth and power, there were cracks in the foundation. All she had to do was find the right place to strike. Chapter 4: The First Fractures. Lea woke to the soft sound of footsteps outside her door, the faint murmur of voices just beyond her reach. The morning air was still, the scent of fresh linen and polished wood, faint but present. She lingered in bed for a moment, her eyes tracing the ornate patterns on the ceiling as she braced herself for another day in the Min household. When she descended the grand staircase, the air seemed heavier, the silence more deliberate. In the dining room, Jian and Madame Wu sat at the long table, their voices low and serious. Jian's sister, Rui, was also present, her eyes sharp and calculating as they flicked toward Lea. "Good morning," Lea said, her tone polite but measured. Madame Wu looked up, her expression cool. "You're just in time. Sit." Lea took her place at the table, her movements controlled as she avoided Rui's scrutinizing gaze. The food was impeccably arranged, but the tension in the room made it hard to eat. "Lea," Madame Wu began, her tone formal, "I've been considering how you can contribute to this family. It's time you started taking on responsibilities." Lea set her fork down, her posture composed. "Of course. What would you like me to do?" Madame Wu's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You'll oversee the staff and manage the household affairs. It's important that you prove yourself capable." Jian said nothing, his focus fixed on his phone, but Rui smirked faintly, as if enjoying the show. "I understand," Lea replied, her voice steady. "I'll do my best." The first task Madame Wu assigned was to audit the household's expenses. It seemed simple on the surface, but as Lea pored over the ledgers and receipts in the study, she noticed discrepancies. Large sums of money allocated to ambiguous projects and vague descriptions that hinted at something more. The scent of old paper filled the room as Lea leaned closer to the documents, her sharp eyes scanning every line. Her heart quickened as she realized these weren't mere accounting errors. The numbers pointed to secret dealings, possibly tied to Jian's work. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, Rui stepped inside, her movements graceful but predatory. "Busy already?" Rui said, her voice light but mocking. Lea closed the ledger, her expression neutral. "Just getting familiar with everything." Rui approached, her presence invasive. "Mother's testing you, you know. She doesn't think you belong here." "And what do you think?" Lea asked, her tone calm but challenging. Rui tilted her head, her smile sharp. "I think you're hiding something, but don't worry, I'll figure out what it is." Lea held Rui's gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm sure you will." Rui lingered for a moment longer before leaving, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. That evening, the family gathered in the drawing room. Jian sat in an armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, while Madame Wu and Rui discussed plans for an upcoming event. Lea observed quietly, her mind still turning over the discrepancies in the accounts. At one point, Jian's phone buzzed, and he stood abruptly. "I need to take this," he said, leaving the room without explanation. Lea's eyes followed him, her instincts alert. She excused herself moments later, slipping down the hallway toward his office. The faint sound of Jian's voice filtered through the partially closed door. "I told you to handle it discreetly," he hissed, his tone low but furious. "I can't have this blowing back on me." Lea froze, her breath catching. She couldn't make out the other side of the conversation, but Jian's words were enough to confirm her suspicions. When the call ended and the door creaked open, Lea quickly ducked into the shadows. Jian strode past her, his jaw tight, the faint smell of whiskey and frustration clinging to him. As the hallway fell silent again, Lea emerged, her resolve hardening. Whatever Jian was involved in, it was dangerous, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Back in her room, Lea sat by the window, the cool night air brushing against her face. Malin's photograph rested in her lap, a reminder of why she couldn't back down. "I'll find it," she whispered, her voice firm. "I'll find the cracks in this family and bring it all down." The stars outside seemed brighter that night, as if offering her a faint glimmer of hope. She clung to it, knowing the fight was just beginning. Chapter 5: The Price of Defiance. The following morning dawned cold and grey, the sunlight barely breaking through the heavy clouds. Lea stood in the kitchen, watching the staff as they worked in practiced silence. The faint aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the scent of brewing tea, but even this warmth couldn't mask the tension that lingered in the air. She turned to the head maid, a woman in her 50s named Yumei, whose hands moved deftly as she prepared a tray of tea for Madame Wu. "How long have you worked here?" Lea asked, her voice soft but curious. Yumei hesitated, her eyes darting toward the other staff. "Over 20 years, ma'am," she replied, her tone cautious. Lea nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You must know the family well, then." Yumei didn't respond immediately, her lips pressing into a thin line. Finally, she said, "It's not my place to know, only to serve." The words were spoken carefully, but Lea caught the flicker of unease in Yumei's gaze. There were stories hidden behind those polite words, stories Lea was determined to uncover. At breakfast, Madame Wu's sharp eyes were fixed on Lea, as if she were a specimen under a microscope. Jian sat beside her, his attention once again absorbed by his phone. Rui, however, was visibly enjoying the tension, her smirk growing with every passing moment of silence. "I trust you're finding your responsibilities manageable," Madame Wu asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Lea set her teacup down gently, her expression composed. "I am. It's an adjustment, but I'm learning quickly." "Good," Madame Wu said, her tone brisk. "You'll need to maintain that pace. There's no room for mistakes here." Jian finally looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed. "Mother, leave her to it. She'll handle it." Madame Wu gave him a pointed look, but said nothing further. The unspoken tension between mother and son lingered in the air, thick and palpable. Lea quietly observed, filing away every interaction, every nuance. It was becoming increasingly clear that the cracks in this family ran deep, and they were more than just personal, they were structural. Later that day, Lea returned to the ledgers in the study, her fingers tracing the faintly smudged ink on the pages. The scent of aged paper filled her nose as she pieced together the trail of irregularities she had found the day before. Several entries were labeled with vague descriptions: consulting fees, logistics support, third-party services, but the amounts were too large to go unnoticed. She jotted down notes, her pen moving swiftly across a small notepad she kept tucked in her jacket. As she worked, a soft creak from the hallway made her pause. Lea's training kicked in, and she quickly slipped the notepad into her pocket. The door opened, and Jian walked in, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone sharp but calm. Lea turned toward him, her posture relaxed. "Going over the household accounts. Your mother asked me to ensure everything was in order." Jian's gaze swept over the desk, lingering for a moment on the ledgers. "You don't need to concern yourself with that," he said, moving closer. "The accounts are fine." "I noticed a few discrepancies," Lea said, carefully watching his reaction. "I thought I'd bring them to your attention." His jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Leave it to the accountants. That's not your role." Lea held his gaze, her expression neutral. "Of course." Jian lingered for a moment, as if trying to gauge her intent, before turning and leaving the room. As the door closed behind him, Lea exhaled slowly, her pulse quickening. Jian's reaction only confirmed what she already suspected. there was something in these accounts he didn't want her to find. That evening, after dinner, the family gathered in the drawing room, the dim light from the chandelier casting long shadows across the walls. Rui was the first to speak, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You've been awfully busy, Lea. Mother says you've taken to your new duties well." Lea smiled faintly, masking her unease. "I'm doing my best to meet her expectations." Rui's smile widened, her tone growing sharper. "Just don't overstep. It's easy to get lost in things you don't understand." Madame Wu glanced at her daughter but said nothing, sipping her tea with calculated indifference. Jian, seated by the fireplace, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the flames. Lea met Rui's gaze, her voice calm but firm. "I appreciate the advice. I'll be careful." The subtle exchange didn't go unnoticed by Madame Wu, whose piercing eyes shifted between the two women. She set her teacup down with a quiet clink and addressed Lea directly. "You should know that this family has survived because we've learned to stay within our boundaries. Keep that in mind as you move forward." The warning was clear, and Lea nodded politely, hiding the storm brewing inside her. That night, Lea sat alone in her room, the faint sounds of the house settling around her. The pieces were falling into place, but the stakes were rising. The Min family was more than just a web of secrets. It was a fortress, and each step deeper into its corridors brought new risks. She looked down at the photograph of Maylin she kept on her bedside table, her daughter's bright smile a reminder of why she couldn't back down. The faint scent of lavender from the sachet under her pillow calmed her nerves as she whispered to herself, "They think they can control me. They have no idea who they're dealing with." Tomorrow, she would take the next step, no matter how dangerous it might be. Chapter 6. The Storm Within. The next morning was eerily calm, the air heavy with the promise of a storm. The scent of rain lingered faintly in the breeze as Lea walked the garden paths, her footsteps muted by the gravel beneath her. The perfection of the landscape, the symmetry of the flower beds, and the immaculate hedges all felt suffocating, a facade of order masking the chaos within the Min family. She paused by a stone fountain, the water trickling softly, and turned her thoughts inward. Every conversation, every calculated glance, and every tense silence in the house was a piece of a larger puzzle. The ledgers, Jian's reactions, Madame Wu's sharp warnings, they all pointed to something bigger, something dangerous. Lea took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling her lungs. She had to tread carefully. One wrong move, and the entire family would turn on her. Back inside, Madame Wu summoned her to the parlor. The room was bathed in soft light from the tall windows, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Madame Wu sat on an upholstered chair, her posture regal, a cup of tea balanced delicately in her hand. "Lea," she began, her tone measured. "I've been watching you closely. You've done well so far, but this family demands more than just competence. It demands loyalty." Lea met her gaze, her expression calm. "I understand. Loyalty is earned through trust. And I hope to prove myself worthy." Madame Wu tilted her head, a faint smile playing at her lips. "Trust is fragile, Lea. It can be shattered with the slightest misstep. Remember that." "I will," Lea replied, her voice steady. "I appreciate your guidance." Madame Wu's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer before she nodded. "Good. Now go and ensure the preparations for tomorrow's event are in order. Everything must be perfect." Lea excused herself, her mind racing. The warning in Madame Wu's words was clear, but it only solidified her resolve. The more they tried to control her, the more she would uncover. In the study, Lea resumed her work on the ledgers, her sharp eyes scanning each line of text. The discrepancies she had found earlier seemed deliberate, as though someone was trying to hide large transactions behind vague descriptions. She flipped to a page that caught her attention, a payment labeled "External Logistics," with no further explanation. She scribbled notes in her pocket journal, her thoughts interrupted by the faint creak of the door behind her. Lea's heart raced, but she didn't look up. "Busy again?" Jian's voice was calm, but edged with suspicion. Lea straightened, closing the ledger with practiced ease. "Your mother asked me to ensure the accounts are ready for the event. I wanted to be thorough." Jian stepped closer, his presence heavy. "You don't need to worry about the details. That's handled by professionals." I understand, Lea said smoothly, but I thought it would reflect well on me if I showed initiative. Jian's gaze lingered on her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. Fine, just don't overstep. As he left, Lea exhaled slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. She had been walking a tightrope ever since she arrived in this house, but the stakes were growing higher with each passing day. That evening, the family gathered in the grand dining room for dinner. The table was set with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses, the soft glow of the chandelier casting long shadows across the walls. Rui, as usual, was the first to speak, her tone light but laced with malice. Lea, I hear you've been working hard in the study. Keeping busy, are we? Lea smiled faintly. There's always something to do in a house like this. I want to make sure everything runs smoothly. Rui's eyes glinted. Such dedication, mother must be pleased. Madame Wu, seated at the head of the table, sipped her wine, her gaze fixed on Lea. Pleased, yes, but diligence must be tempered with discretion. It's important to know one's limits. Lea met Madame Wu's gaze, her expression serene. I understand. I'll be careful. Jian said nothing throughout the meal, his focus shifting between his food and his phone. His silence was unsettling, but Lea knew better than to draw attention to it. Later that night, Lea retreated to her room, her mind heavy with thoughts. She sat by the window, the cool breeze carrying the faint scent of rain. The storm outside mirrored the one building inside her, tension, unease, and the weight of her mission pressing down on her. She opened her pocket journal, flipping through the notes she had gathered. The accounts, the vague transactions, Jian's secretive behavior, it all pointed to something bigger, something worth risking everything to expose. Lea looked at the photograph of Meilin on her bedside table, her daughter's innocent smile, a beacon of hope. She touched the frame gently, her voice a quiet promise in the dark. For you, I'll see this through. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the windows. Lea lay back on the bed, her mind racing with plans. The Min family had built their fortress on secrets, but she would find a way to tear it down, one crack at a time. Chapter 7: Whispers of Shadows. The morning broke with a pale, watery sun that barely pierced the heavy clouds. Rain had swept through the night, leaving the world outside gleaming and fresh. Inside the Min estate, however, the air was thick with tension. Every step Lea took echoed faintly against the cold marble floors, a reminder of how isolated she truly was in this house. She moved through the hallways, her sharp eyes noting every detail, the subtle shift in the staff's behavior, the way Madame Wu seemed to linger just a moment longer whenever Lea entered a room, and the cold distance Jian maintained as if he were guarding a secret. Lea spent the morning supervising the preparations for the charity gala the Min family was hosting that evening. The grand ballroom was a hive of activity, filled with the clinking of crystal glasses, the hum of conversations among the staff, and the faint floral scent from the elaborate arrangements that lined the room. As she checked the seating arrangements, Rui approached her, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. You're awfully hands-on for someone new to this family, Rui remarked, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. Lea smiled faintly, her tone neutral. I want to ensure everything is perfect for tonight. Rui tilted her head, studying Lea with narrowed eyes. You know, you don't have to try so hard. Mother isn't easily impressed. I'm not doing this to impress anyone, Lea replied calmly, holding Rui's gaze. Rui smirked, leaning in slightly. Good, because you're not fooling anyone. Lea didn't flinch, her composure unshaken. I wouldn't dream of it. Rui lingered for a moment longer before turning and walking away, her perfume lingering in the air like a warning. Lea exhaled slowly, her mind racing. Rui was watching her too closely now, and that meant she had to be even more careful. That afternoon, as the preparations continued, Lea slipped away to Jian's office. The room was empty, and the faint scent of tobacco still lingered in the air. She knew her time was limited, so she moved quickly, her fingers gliding over the edges of the desk drawers, searching for anything that might reveal more about Jian's hidden dealings. In one drawer, she found a locked file box. Her heart quickened as she reached for it, but the sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. She quickly closed the drawer and stepped away from the desk, pretending to straighten a nearby bookshelf. The door opened, and Jian entered, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice sharp. Lea turned to him, her face calm. "I was just checking to see if the documents for tonight's event were here." "I didn't want to disturb you." Jian's eyes flicked toward the desk, his jaw tightening slightly. "You don't need to concern yourself with those. I've already taken care of it." Lea nodded, offering a polite smile. "Of course, I'll leave you to it." As she walked past him, she could feel his gaze on her back, heavy and suspicious. She kept her movements measured, her breath steady, until she was safely out of the room. The gala began that evening, and the Min estate transformed into a spectacle of wealth and power. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and glittering gowns, the soft murmur of conversation mingling with the sound of a string quartet playing in the corner. The faint scent of champagne and expensive perfume filled the air, creating an atmosphere of opulence that felt almost suffocating. Lea moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Jian was at the center of it all, his charm on full display as he mingled with guests and basked in their admiration. Madame Wu and Rui were close by, their presence a reminder of the tightly controlled image the Min family projected. As Lea passed by a group of guests, she overheard snippets of conversation that made her pause. "Strange how much they've expanded recently. Logistics contracts overseas, I hear. A bit too ambitious, don't you think?" The words were vague, but they confirmed what Lea already suspected. Jian's dealings extended far beyond the law, and his network was growing. Later that night, as the gala wound down and the guests began to leave, Lea slipped out of the ballroom and into the quiet of the study. She knew the risks, but the locked file box in Jian's desk had been gnawing at her mind all evening. She picked the lock with practiced ease, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, she found a stack of documents, contracts, transaction records, and correspondence, all pointing to a web of illegal activity. Smuggling, bribery, offshore accounts, it was all there. Lea's breath caught as she flipped through the pages, her mind racing. This was it. This was the evidence she needed to bring Jian down. But it was also dangerous. Too dangerous to keep in the house. She quickly photographed the documents with her phone, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Just as she finished, she heard voices approaching the study. Her heart skipped a beat as she hurriedly returned the files to the box and locked it, slipping out of the room moments before the door opened. Back in her room, Lea sat on the edge of her bed, her mind buzzing with the weight of what she had found. The photograph of Malin on her bedside table caught her eye, and she picked it up, tracing her fingers over her daughter's bright smile. "This is for you," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'll make sure no one can hurt us again." The rain began to fall outside, a soft patter against the windows. Lea stared into the darkness, her resolve hardening. The Min family thought their fortress was impenetrable, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. The first crack had appeared, and she was ready to widen it. Chapter 8: The Warning. The next morning broke with a pale light that barely pierced through the heavy grey clouds. The rain from the night before had left the estate damp and quiet, the grounds shrouded in mist. Lea awoke with a start, her mind immediately snapping to the images she had captured on her phone. They sat like a weight in her pocket, evidence that could destroy Jian's carefully curated world, but only if she could wield it properly. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She tucked her phone into the drawer of her bedside table and stood, smoothing the folds of her robe before opening the door. It was Yumei, the head maid, her expression strained. "Madame Wu would like to see you in the drawing room," she said quietly, her voice low enough that it felt like a warning in itself. Lea nodded. "Thank you, Yumei. I'll be right down." The drawing room was colder than usual, the faint scent of roses lingering in the air from the fresh arrangements placed on every surface. Madame Wu sat by the window, dressed immaculately as always, a cup of tea resting on the table beside her. Jian stood near the fireplace, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. As Lea entered, Madame Wu turned her sharp gaze toward her, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Sit," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. Lea moved with measured grace, taking a seat opposite them. The tension in the room was palpable, pressing against her chest like a weight. "We've noticed," Madame Wu began, her words slow and deliberate, "that you've been exploring parts of this house that do not concern you." Lea kept her expression calm, her hands resting lightly in her lap. "I'm not sure what you mean, Madame Wu." Jian stepped forward, his voice low and edged with menace. "Don't play coy, Lea. You've been snooping, and we don't take kindly to that." The accusation hung in the air like a knife. Lea's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay composed. "If I've overstepped, I apologize. My intention has only been to understand how I can better contribute to this family." "Contribute?" Madame Wu repeated, her tone icy. "Your contributions are appreciated, but you need to know your place. This family thrives on loyalty and discretion. If you cannot uphold those values, you have no place here." Lea met Madame Wu's gaze, her voice steady. "I understand. I will be more mindful moving forward." Madame Wu studied her for a moment, the silence stretching unbearably. Finally, she nodded, as if satisfied, for now. "Good. You may go." Lea stood and left the room, her movements calm despite the storm building inside her. As she walked down the hallway, she felt Jian's eyes on her back, burning with suspicion. She knew she was on thin ice now, but there was no turning back. Later that day, Lea retreated to the garden, seeking a moment of solitude. The air was crisp, and the faint scent of wet earth mingled with the soft rustling of leaves. She paced along the gravel paths, her mind racing as she replayed the morning's confrontation. They knew. Somehow, they knew. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She checked it quickly, her breath hitching when she saw an anonymous message. "You're getting too close. Be careful." Lea's grip on the phone tightened as she scanned the empty garden. Her instincts told her the warning wasn't from Jian or Madame Wu. Someone else was watching, someone who knew what she was doing. But was this person friend or foe? The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn sharply. It was Yume, her expression guarded. "Ma'am," the maid said, lowering her voice. "I thought you should know. Madame Wu has asked the staff to report anything unusual." "She's watching you closely." Lea's chest tightened, but she gave Yume a faint smile. "Thank you for letting me know." Yume hesitated, her eyes darting around the garden. "Be careful," she whispered. "This house, it's not what it seems." Before Lea could respond, Yume hurried away, her steps light and quick. Lea stood there, the warning echoing in her mind. That evening, Lea locked herself in her room, the faint hum of the house settling around her. She retrieved her phone from the drawer and reviewed the photos she had taken of Jian's documents. Each piece of evidence felt like a weapon in her hands, but one she needed to wield with precision. She stared at Maylin's photograph on her bedside table, the soft light casting a halo around her daughter's smiling face. "This is for you," she whispered. "No matter how dangerous it gets, I won't stop." As the rain began to fall outside, Lea lay back on the bed, her mind racing. She had been warned, but she couldn't afford to back down now. The Min family's secrets were unraveling, and she was determined to be the one to expose them. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing within the Min household. Chapter 9. The Web Tightens. The storm had passed by morning, but the air was still heavy with humidity, a lingering tension that mirrored the atmosphere in the Min household. Lea dressed carefully, her movements deliberate as she prepared for another day of navigating the labyrinth of suspicion and control. The warning she had received the day before played on a loop in her mind, each word sharpening her resolve. As she descended the grand staircase, the soft murmur of voices reached her ears. She followed the sound to the dining room, where Jian and Madame Wu were seated at the table, their conversation low and serious. Rui sat beside them, her expression smug, as though she were privy to a secret Lea wasn't. Lea entered the room with a calm smile, masking the unease twisting in her stomach. "Good morning," she said, her voice even. Madame Wu looked up, her sharp eyes scanning Lea with a precision that felt almost surgical. "Good morning," she replied coolly. "We were just discussing tonight's business dinner." Jian has invited a few associates to join us. Lea nodded. I'll ensure everything is prepared. Jian leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You'll join us, of course. It's important you understand the kind of people I deal with. The words were delivered casually, but Lea heard the undertone of control, the unspoken warning that she was being watched. Of course, she replied, her tone neutral. I'll be ready. The day passed in a flurry of activity as Lea oversaw the preparations for the dinner. The kitchen buzzed with energy, the scent of roasted meats and freshly baked bread filling the air. The dining room was meticulously arranged, the table set with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the light like shards of ice. As Lea worked, she caught snippets of conversation among the staff. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with unease. Whatever tensions existed within the Min family seemed to ripple outward, infecting everyone in the house. When evening fell, the guests began to arrive. They were powerful men, their tailored suits and confident smiles masking the ruthlessness that lay beneath. Lea greeted them with polite smiles, her sharp eyes cataloguing every detail, the way they exchanged knowing glances, the faint edge in their laughter, the guarded way they spoke to Jian. The dinner itself was a performance. Jian was charming and self-assured, his every word calculated to impress. Madame Wu played her role as the gracious matriarch, while Rui flirted shamelessly with the guests, her laughter sharp and insincere. Lea sat quietly, observing, her senses attuned to every nuance. At one point, one of the guests turned to her, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. You're Jian's wife, he said, his tone curious. You must be very proud of him. Lea smiled faintly. I am. He's accomplished so much. The man's gaze lingered, his smile faintly predatory. And yet you seem so quiet. Don't you have anything to say? Lea's heart quickened, but she maintained her composure. I prefer to listen. You learn more that way. The man chuckled, his laughter low and unsettling. A wise answer. Jian glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but she could feel the weight of his scrutiny. She had passed this test, but barely. After the dinner, Lea excused herself and slipped away to the garden, needing a moment to breathe. The cool night air was a relief, the faint scent of jasmine calming her nerves. She paced along the gravel path, her mind racing with everything she had observed. Impressive, a voice said, cutting through the quiet. Lea turned sharply to find Rui standing nearby, her arms crossed and her smile sharp. You handled yourself well tonight, Rui continued, her tone mocking. But don't think I don't see what you're doing. Lea raised an eyebrow, her expression calm. And what is it you think I'm doing? Rui stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low whisper. You're playing a game you don't understand, and it's only a matter of time before you lose. Lea met Rui's gaze, her voice steady. Then you should enjoy the show while it lasts. Rui's smile faltered for a moment, before she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the gravel. Lea watched her go, her mind turning over Rui's words. It was clear now, Rui suspected something, and she wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth. That night, back in her room, Lea locked the door and retrieved her phone. She reviewed the photos of the documents she had taken from Jian's office, her mind piecing together the fragments of information. Offshore accounts, illegal contracts, bribes, it all pointed to a network of corruption that extended far beyond the Min family. As she scrolled through the images, her phone buzzed with a new message. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear. They're watching you. Be careful who you trust. Lea stared at the screen, her pulse racing. Someone was helping her, but she didn't know who or why. The only thing she knew for certain was that she couldn't afford to trust anyone. She looked at Maylin's photograph on the bedside table, her daughter's smile a reminder of why she couldn't give up. I'll protect you, she whispered, her voice firm. No matter what it takes. The house was quiet, but Lea knew the storm was far from over. The Min family's secrets were unraveling, and she was determined to expose them, even if it meant walking straight into the heart of danger. Chapter 10: The Fault Line. The morning after the dinner brought a sharp chill to the air, the kind that seemed to seep into the very bones of the house. Lea moved through the Min estate with purpose, her every step calculated, her every action measured. She knew the walls were closing in. Rui's pointed warning and the anonymous text were more than enough to tell her that her enemies, and perhaps even her allies, were circling. As she entered the kitchen to grab a cup of tea, the staff fell silent, their eyes flickering toward her before hastily returning to their tasks. The faint scent of freshly brewed tea and baked bread hung in the air, but even the warmth of the kitchen couldn't ease the tension that had taken hold of the household. "You may," Lea said softly, addressing the head maid. "Is everything all right?" You May hesitated, her hands busy polishing a silver tray. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her voice low, but the tightness around her eyes told another story. Before Lea could press further, a sharp voice cut through the room. "There you are." Lea turned to find Madame Wu standing in the doorway, her presence as imposing as ever. The older woman's gaze was piercing, her tone clipped. "Come with me. We need to talk." Madame Wu led Lea to the library, a room steeped in dark wood and the faint, comforting scent of aged books. The heavy drapes were drawn, allowing only a dim light to filter through, giving the space a shadowy quality. Madame Wu took a seat by the fireplace, her posture as rigid as her expression. She gestured for Lea to sit across from her. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," Madame Wu began, her voice carrying an edge of cold formality. "You've done well integrating into this family, but there are expectations you still seem to misunderstand." Lea tilted her head slightly, keeping her expression calm. "I'd like to understand better. What do you mean?" Madame Wu's eyes narrowed. "This family operates on discretion. Jian's affairs, our business dealings, these are not matters for you to concern yourself with. I've noticed your curiosity, and I'm here to remind you that curiosity can be dangerous." The words landed like a blow, but Lea didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her tone measured. "I'm only trying to support Jian and the family in any way I can. If I've overstepped, I apologize." Madame Wu studied her for a moment, the silence stretching unbearably. Then she nodded, though her gaze remained sharp. "Good. Keep it that way." As Lea left the library, her mind raced. Madame Wu's warning wasn't just about keeping her in line, it was a declaration of war. The Min matriarch had seen enough to know that Lea was a threat, and she wasn't going to sit idly by. Later that day, as Lea returned to her room, she found a small envelope slipped under her door. Her breath hitched as she picked it up, the weight of the paper heavier than it should have been. Inside was a single piece of paper with a chilling message scrawled in neat handwriting. "Stop looking where you shouldn't, or there will be consequences." Lea sat on the edge of her bed, the note trembling slightly in her hands. Her thoughts turned immediately to Maylin. The threat was clear. It wasn't just her life at stake anymore. If she pushed too far, they would come after her daughter. Her jaw tightened as she folded the note and tucked it into her pocket. "Not if I stop you first," she whispered to herself, her voice hard with resolve. That evening, Lea waited until the household had quieted before she made her move. She slipped out of her room, her footsteps silent against the polished floors, and headed for Jian's office. She had spent days piecing together his web of corruption, but she needed something definitive, something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The office was dark, the faint scent of tobacco still lingering in the air. Lea worked quickly, her fingers skimming over drawers and shelves, until she found a hidden compartment in the back of the desk. Inside was a folder, marked with a simple word: contracts. As she flipped through the papers, her pulse quickened. These weren't just contracts, they were agreements tied to illegal smuggling operations and offshore accounts. The names listed were powerful, dangerous. This was the leverage Jian and the Min family used to maintain their influence. Lea photographed the documents, her movements swift but precise. As she slipped the folder back into place, a sudden creak from the hallway made her freeze. She held her breath, listening intently. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. She hurried to extinguish the small flashlight she had brought and ducked into the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. The door creaked open and Jian stepped inside, his silhouette framed by the faint light from the hallway. Lea stayed perfectly still, her body pressed against the wall. Jian moved toward his desk, his movements deliberate. He paused, his hand resting on the edge of the desk. as if sensing something was amiss. After a tense moment, he turned and left the room, closing the door behind him. Lea exhaled slowly, her hands trembling as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. She couldn't keep this up much longer. One slip, and she would be exposed. Back in her room, Lea locked the door and sank onto the bed, her mind spinning. The evidence she had gathered was damning, but it also made her a target. She stared at Malin's photograph on the bedside table, the faint smile on her daughter's face, a reminder of why she couldn't stop now. She pulled out her phone and began composing a message to her contact, the one person she trusted to help her bring the Min family down. "I have the proof. I need to move quickly before they suspect more. Meet me tomorrow, usual place." As she hit send, Lea felt the weight of her choices settle over her. The fault lines in the Min family's empire were widening, and she was determined to bring the whole structure crashing down. But she knew the Min family wouldn't go down without a fight, and the next move could be theirs. Chapter 11. A Shadowed Meeting. The morning dawned with a restless energy in the air, the grey sky a canvas of shifting clouds. Lea rose early, her thoughts clouded with anticipation and unease. The message she had sent the previous night had gone unanswered, but she knew her contact well enough to trust they would come through. She had to believe it. As she moved through the house, her every step was shadowed by a growing sense of paranoia. The staff's glances felt longer, more scrutinizing. Jian's silence over breakfast was heavier than usual. Rui's smirk seemed sharper, as though she knew something Lea didn't. She kept her composure, sipping her tea while mentally rehearsing her escape for the afternoon. "I'll be going into the city later," she told Madame Wu as she set her cup down. Madame Wu's gaze flicked to her, cool and assessing. "For what purpose?" "A few errands," Lea replied smoothly. "There are things I need for the house." Madame Wu's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. "Don't be too long. The family needs you present." Lea smiled faintly, masking the tension thrumming in her chest. "Of course." By early afternoon, Lea slipped out of the estate under the guise of running errands. The car ride into the city was quiet, the driver saying little beyond the occasional acknowledgement. The streets were busy, the hum of life offering a brief reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere of the Min household. She had chosen a secluded park as the meeting spot, a place where she and her contact had met before, under similarly tense circumstances. The faint scent of damp earth and the rustling of leaves filled the air as Lea made her way to the bench they had agreed upon. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, her pulse quickening with each passing second. Finally, a figure emerged from the shadows, their steps light but deliberate. "Lea!" The voice was low but familiar. She turned to face Detective Liao, an old ally from her bodyguard days. His weathered face was lined with concern, his sharp eyes scanning the area as he approached. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come," she said, her voice steady, despite the relief that coursed through her. Liao sat beside her, his movements tense. "I had to be careful. If the Min family catches wind of this, it won't just be you they come after." Lea reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, handing it to him. "I have the proof. Contracts, transactions, offshore accounts. It's all here. Jian's network is bigger than I imagined, and it's tied to people in high places." Liao's brows furrowed as he scrolled through the photos, his jaw tightening. "This is enough to open an investigation. But Lea, you realize what this means? If they find out you've exposed them—" "I know the risks," she interrupted, her voice firm. "But I don't have a choice. Malin's future depends on this. I won't let her grow up under their control." Liao sighed, slipping the phone into his pocket. "I'll start the process. But you need to be prepared. When this hits, it's going to hit hard. They'll retaliate." Lea nodded, her gaze hard. "I've handled worse." As she returned to the Min estate later that afternoon, the sense of unease in the house was palpable. Jian was waiting for her in the entryway, his posture stiff, his expression unreadable. "You were gone longer than I expected," he said, his tone casual, but the undercurrent of suspicion was unmistakable. "There was more traffic than I anticipated," Lea replied smoothly, removing her coat. "I picked up everything we needed for the house." Jian's eyes lingered on her for a moment before he nodded. "Good. Mother was asking about you." I'll go see her now, Lea said, her tone light as she moved past him. She could feel his gaze on her back as she ascended the stairs, the weight of it pressing down on her like a physical force. That evening, Lea locked herself in her room, her nerves on edge. The meeting with Liao had gone well, but it had also left her exposed. She knew the Min family wouldn't stay in the dark for long, and when they discovered her betrayal, their wrath would be swift and merciless. She sat by the window, staring out at the garden below. The faint glow of the moon bathed the grounds in silver light, a stark contrast to the darkness she felt creeping ever closer. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Liao. I've started the process. Be careful. They'll suspect soon. Lea stared at the screen, her resolve hardening. Let them, she whispered. I'm ready. As the house settled into uneasy silence, Lea prepared for what was to come. The Min family's fortress of secrets was beginning to crumble, and she was determined to see it fall, even if it meant risking everything. Chapter 12: The Mask Slips. The morning arrived heavy with tension. The air in the Min household felt colder, as if the walls themselves were aware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Lea moved through the grand halls with careful precision, her senses heightened, her every movement calculated. The conversation with Detective Liao replayed in her mind, each word a reminder of the risks she was taking. In the dining room, breakfast was a quiet affair. Jian sat at the head of the table, his eyes dark and thoughtful as he scrolled through his phone. Madame Wu was poised as ever, sipping her tea with an elegance that belied her ruthless nature. Rui, however, seemed more animated than usual, her sharp glances toward Lea carrying a sense of mischief. No, malice. Lea, Rui said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was light, but her words carried an edge. You've been spending a lot of time out of the house lately. It's not like you to be so independent. Lea glanced up from her plate, her expression calm. I've been running errands, as you know, making sure everything is in order for the family. Rui's smile widened, predatory. How thoughtful of you. But I hope you're not overextending yourself. It would be a shame if you misplaced your priorities. Madame Wu set her teacup down with a soft clink, her sharp eyes shifting to Lea. Rui is right. This family demands loyalty and focus. I trust you understand that. Lea met Madame Wu's gaze evenly. I do. My focus is entirely on this family. Jian, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Good, he said, his voice low and measured, because there's no room for mistakes. The unspoken threat hung in the air like a blade, and Lea nodded, her expression giving nothing away. Inside, however, her pulse quickened. They were closing in. After breakfast, Lea retreated to the study, ostensibly to continue organizing the household accounts. The scent of aged wood and leather-bound books filled the air as she sat at the desk, flipping through papers with practiced focus. In truth, her mind was elsewhere, calculating her next move. The door creaked open, and Jian stepped inside. His presence was heavy, the air seeming to shift with his arrival. Lea looked up, masking her unease with a polite smile. Jian, she said. I didn't expect you. He crossed the room slowly, his footsteps deliberate. I thought I'd check in on you, he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. You've been busy lately. Lea closed the ledger in front of her, folding her hands neatly on the desk. I've been ensuring everything is in order for the family. There's a lot to manage. Jian leaned against the edge of the desk, his gaze piercing. You're very dedicated, almost too dedicated. Lea's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. I take my responsibilities seriously. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Do you? Because I've noticed some unusual behavior. Going places you don't need to, asking questions you don't need to ask. Lea met his gaze, her expression calm, despite the storm building inside her. I've only been doing what I thought was expected of me. If I've overstepped, I apologize. Jian straightened, his smile thin and cold. Just be careful. This family values loyalty above all else. As he left the room, Lea exhaled slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. Jian's words weren't just a warning, they were a declaration. He knew she was up to something, and he wouldn't hesitate to act if he confirmed his suspicions. That evening, Lea found herself alone in the drawing room, the flickering light from the fireplace casting long shadows across the walls. She stared into the flames, her mind racing with thoughts of escape, retaliation, and the weight of her mission. A soft sound behind her made her turn sharply. It was Yume, the head maid, her face pale and tense. "Ma'am," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I need to speak with you." Lea nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "What is it?" Yume hesitated, wringing her hands. "I overheard Madame Wu and Rui earlier today. They were talking about you. They think you're hiding something, and they're planning to test you." Lea's pulse quickened. "What kind of test?" "They didn't say," Yume replied, her voice trembling. "But Madame Wu said they'll find out where your loyalty truly lies. You need to be careful." Lea placed a reassuring hand on Yume's arm. "Thank you for telling me. I'll handle it." Yume nodded, her fear evident. "Please, ma'am, be safe." Later that night, Lea sat by the window in her room, the moonlight casting a pale glow over her face. She thought of Malin, her daughter's innocent smile, a beacon in the darkness. The weight of her decisions pressed heavily on her, but she knew there was no turning back. She retrieved her phone and typed a message to Detective Liao. "They're on to me. I need to move faster. How soon can you act?" The reply came minutes later. "Soon. Hold your position for now, but be ready." Lea set the phone down, her jaw tightening. She had to survive this, not just for herself, but for Malin. The Min family thought they could control her, manipulate her into submission, but they didn't know the fire they had ignited. As the house fell into silence, Lea prepared herself for what was to come. The Min family's game was becoming more dangerous, but she was ready to play, and to win. Chapter 13. The Trap Tightens. The following day dawned unusually bright, the sunlight casting sharp angles of light and shadow across the Min estate. To Lea, the brightness seemed almost mocking, a cruel contrast to the dark schemes unraveling inside the house. The warning from Yume replayed in her mind as she moved through the halls, her every step deliberate, her every action calculated. At breakfast, the atmosphere was taut with unspoken tension. Jian sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, but his eyes heavy with scrutiny. Madame Wu was composed as always, her gaze flitting to Lea occasionally, like a predator assessing its prey. Rui, on the other hand, seemed more energized than usual, her sharp smile and pointed comments betraying her anticipation. "Lea," Madame Wu said suddenly, her voice slicing through the quiet. "I've been thinking about how to better integrate you into the family's affairs. There's a business luncheon tomorrow. You'll join us." Lea's hand paused briefly over her teacup. "Of course, I'd be happy to." Rui smirked, leaning forward slightly. "It'll be enlightening, a chance for you to truly understand the expectations of being part of this family." Lea met her gaze evenly, her smile faint. "I look forward to it." As the day wore on, the tension only grew. Lea's movements were shadowed by the weight of suspicion, her every action observed more closely than before. She spent the afternoon in the study, going over the household accounts as an excuse to remain occupied. The faint scent of polished wood and aged paper filled the air as she worked, her mind churning with plans. Halfway through the task, the door opened, and Rui stepped in unannounced. Her presence felt invasive, her smile laced with mockery. "Hard at work again?" Rui said, her tone light but insincere. Lea looked up, masking her unease. "There's always something to be done." Rui sauntered closer, her fingers trailing over the desk as she leaned in. "You know, you don't have to work so hard to prove yourself. This family values loyalty, not effort." Lea held her gaze, her voice steady. "I'm loyal to this family." Rui's smile widened, but her eyes remained cold. "I hope so, because if you're not, well, you've seen what happens to those who betray us." The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Lea stayed calm, her expression betraying nothing, even as her pulse quickened. Rui straightened and turned to leave, her heels clicking against the floor. "See you tomorrow, sister-in-law." That night, Lea sat by the window in her room, the faint light of the moon illuminating her thoughts. She knew the luncheon was a test, a carefully orchestrated trap to gauge her loyalty or her betrayal. She would have to tread carefully, balancing on the knife's edge without falling. Her phone buzzed, and she quickly checked the message. It was from Detective Liao. "We're moving faster. Expect contact soon. Stay safe." She exhaled slowly, her grip on the phone tightening. The walls were closing in, but she wasn't alone in this fight. As she stared out at the darkened garden below, her mind raced with contingency plans. The Min family thought they could break her, but they didn't understand her resolve. For Maylin, for the life she was determined to secure for her daughter, she would endure whatever came next. The next morning, the estate was a hive of activity as preparations for the luncheon began. The dining room was transformed into an elegant space, the table set with the finest china and crystal. The scent of fresh flowers filled the air, masking the tension that thrummed beneath the surface. Lea dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was elegant but understated, a deliberate choice to blend in without drawing unnecessary attention. As she stepped into the dining room, she was met with Jian's sharp gaze. "You're on time," he remarked, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. "Of course," Lea replied, her voice calm. Madame Wu entered moments later, her presence commanding. She gestured for Lea to sit beside her, a position that felt more like a spotlight than a privilege. The guests began to arrive soon after, business associates of Jian's, powerful men with calculating eyes and smooth smiles. Lea greeted them politely, masking the unease that churned in her stomach. As the luncheon began, the conversation flowed easily, the men discussing deals and investments with practiced charm. But beneath the surface, Lea sensed the currents of something darker. The names they mentioned, the coded language they used, it all pointed to the shadowy network Jian had built. At one point, one of the men turned to her, his expression curious. "So, Lea, what do you think of Jian's work? It must be fascinating to see it up close." Lea smiled faintly, her voice steady. "Jian's work is impressive. He's built something remarkable." The man's gaze lingered on her, as if searching for cracks in her facade. "Remarkable indeed, but it requires absolute trust and loyalty, don't you think?" "Absolutely," Lea replied without hesitation. "Trust is the foundation of everything." The man nodded, his expression satisfied, for now. By the time the luncheon ended, Lea felt like she had run a marathon. Every word, every glance, every gesture had been a careful calculation. She had passed their test, but she knew it was only a temporary reprieve. As the guests departed, Jian approached her, his expression inscrutable. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Thank you," Lea replied, meeting his gaze evenly. He leaned in slightly, his voice low. "But remember, appearances can be deceiving. Keep that in mind." Lea smiled faintly, masking the storm inside her. "Always." That night, as the house fell silent, Lea reviewed her next steps. The Min family's fortress was beginning to show cracks, but the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous her position became. She glanced at Maylin's photograph on her bedside table, her daughter's innocent smile a reminder of what was at stake. "For you," she whispered, her voice firm, "I'll see this through to the end." The night stretched on, the weight of her mission pressing down on her. But Lea was resolute. The Min family thought they had her cornered, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Chapter 14. The Knife's Edge. The day after the luncheon dawned quiet, the silence in the Min estate more oppressive than ever. Lea awoke with a deep sense of unease, knowing the previous day had only intensified the family's suspicions. Jian's warning still echoed in her mind, each word a blade designed to cut through her defenses. As she dressed, she caught sight of Maylin's photograph on the bedside table. Her daughter's innocent face was a steadying force, a reminder of why she had to keep pushing forward, no matter how precarious her position became. Downstairs, the atmosphere was subdued, but not in the usual way. It was the kind of quiet that signaled danger. Jian was seated in the living room, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp as they tracked her every movement. Madame Wu sat beside him, her hands resting elegantly on the arms of her chair, her expression unreadable. Rui leaned against the grand piano, a faint smirk playing on her lips as though she were waiting for a performance to begin. "Lea," Madame Wu said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Come, sit with us." Lea complied, keeping her movements composed. As she took a seat across from them, the weight of their scrutiny pressed against her like an invisible force. "There's been some concern," Madame Wu began, her tone cool, "about your role in this family. Certain actions of yours have raised questions." Lea tilted her head slightly, feigning confusion. I don't understand. What actions? Jian leaned forward, his gaze piercing. You've been asking questions, going places you shouldn't, and now things are missing. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Lea's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. Missing? I don't know what you mean. Madame Wu's lips pressed into a thin line. Don't insult our intelligence, Lea. This family demands loyalty, not deceit. If you have nothing to hide, then you won't mind proving it. What do you mean? Lea asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Jian stood, his presence towering over her. Your room will be searched. If you're loyal, you have nothing to fear. Lea's heart raced as she ascended the stairs behind them, Rui trailing close behind with an air of smug satisfaction. In her room, Jian and Rui began their search, tearing through drawers, closets, and every hidden corner. Madame Wu stood in the doorway, watching silently, her sharp eyes flickering with triumph as if she expected to catch Lea in the act. Lea kept her composure, her mind racing as she recalled her precautions. The photos of Jian's documents were hidden on a cloud drive, her phone wiped clean of anything incriminating. All they would find were the carefully placed fragments of her disguise. After what felt like an eternity, Jian stepped back, his face a mask of frustration. Nothing, he said coldly. Rui's smirk faltered as she closed the final drawer. She's good at hiding, I'll give her that. Lea turned to Madame Wu, her voice calm but firm. I've done nothing wrong. I'm loyal to this family, and I've worked tirelessly to prove that. If my loyalty is still in question, then perhaps you're looking in the wrong place. Madame Wu studied her for a long moment, the tension crackling in the air like a storm ready to break. Finally, she nodded, her expression unreadable. Very well. But understand this, Lea. If you betray this family, there will be no mercy. I understand, Lea replied, her voice unwavering. When they finally left, Lea sank onto the bed, her body trembling from the effort of holding her composure. She stared at the room they had torn apart, the emptiness mirroring the void she felt inside. Her phone buzzed, and she retrieved it quickly, her heart leaping when she saw the message from Detective Liao. Everything is in motion. Stay strong. We'll make the next move soon. Lea exhaled, her grip on the phone tightening. The storm was coming, and she was at the center of it. That evening, the family gathered in the drawing room. The flickering firelight cast long shadows across the walls, the atmosphere heavy with tension. Jian poured himself a glass of whiskey, his movements deliberate as he watched Lea from the corner of his eye. You were lucky today, Rui said, her voice cutting through the quiet. Lea looked at her, her expression calm. Luck has nothing to do with it. I've done nothing wrong. Rui's smile sharpened. We'll see about that. Madame Wu raised a hand, silencing the conversation. Enough. Lea is still part of this family, and until proven otherwise, she will be treated as such. But make no mistake, Lea, she added, her gaze locking onto her. We're watching. That night, as the house fell silent, Lea sat by the window, staring out at the darkened garden. The events of the day had left her shaken, but not broken. The Min family was closing in, but they had underestimated her resolve. She looked at Meilin's photograph, her daughter's smile a beacon in the darkness. I'll get us out of this, she whispered, her voice steady, no matter what it takes. The storm was building, and Lea knew the next move would be hers. Chapter 15. The Storm Breaks. The morning was deceptively calm. The Min estate bathed in a soft golden light that betrayed nothing of the brewing chaos. Lea awoke to the sound of faint murmurs outside her door. Her body was tense, her mind sharp. After yesterday's search, she knew the family was growing more desperate to uncover her secret. The noose was tightening, and she had to move faster. As she made her way downstairs, she noticed Jian and Madame Wu deep in conversation in the drawing room. Their voices were low, but the occasional sharp edge carried through the still air. Rui was absent, which put Lea on edge. Rui thrived in moments of calculated chaos, and her absence likely meant trouble. Lea, Jian called, his tone curt. Join us. Lea stepped into the room, masking her unease. The air was thick with unspoken tension as she approached, her steps slow and deliberate. She stood before them, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, every fibre of her being ready for whatever might come next. "We've been thinking," Madame Wu began, her tone measured but laced with menace. "Perhaps we've been too hard on you. It's time we give you an opportunity to prove your loyalty." Lea tilted her head slightly, feigning curiosity. "How do you mean?" Jian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Tonight, there's a gathering with some of our closest business associates. You'll assist us with the arrangements and stay close during the conversations. Observe, listen, and ensure our guests are well taken care of." Lea's stomach churned, but she kept her expression calm. "Of course, I'd be happy to help." Jian's eyes narrowed, his gaze lingering as if searching for cracks in her composure. "Good, don't disappoint us." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The household staff worked tirelessly to prepare for the evening, their movements efficient but tense. Lea supervised where she could, her mind racing with plans. The gathering wasn't just a test of her loyalty, it was an opportunity to gather more information. The men Jian called business associates were undoubtedly linked to his shadowy dealings, and tonight might be her chance to confirm it. As the evening fell, the estate transformed into a glittering spectacle. The dining room was resplendent with flickering candles, the scent of fresh flowers mingling with that of expensive perfumes and colognes. The guests began to arrive, their tailored suits and sharp eyes betraying their power. Lea greeted them with practiced poise, her every movement deliberate, her every word measured. Jian was in his element, moving effortlessly among the crowd, his charm on full display. Madame Wu was similarly composed, her regal presence commanding respect. Rui, however, was different. She stayed close to Lea, her sharp gaze never straying far, as if she were waiting for a misstep. As the evening progressed, the conversations grew more guarded. The guests spoke in veiled terms, their words laden with hidden meanings. Lea listened carefully, filing away every detail. "Mrs. Min," one guest said, addressing Madame Wu, "I hear your family's logistics network has expanded significantly. Must be quite lucrative." Madame Wu smiled faintly, her tone cool. "We've been fortunate. Our investments have been carefully managed." "And carefully concealed," another guest added with a chuckle, his words light but his eyes serious. Lea's heart quickened. These weren't just business associates, they were co-conspirators. Midway through the evening, Lea slipped away under the guise of retrieving more wine. In truth, she needed a moment to think and to act. She made her way to Jian's study, her steps silent, her pulse pounding in her ears. Once inside, she locked the door behind her and went straight to the hidden compartment in his desk. The documents were still there, and she quickly photographed additional pages she hadn't managed to capture before. As she worked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated for a moment before pulling it out. The message was from Detective Liao. "We're ready. Send what you have ASAP." Her hands trembled slightly as she attached the photos and hit send. It was a risk, but one she had to take. The evidence was out of her hands now, and the first step in dismantling the Min family's empire was underway. As she returned to the party, she felt Rui's gaze on her immediately. The younger woman approached, her smile sharp and knowing. "Disappearing already?" Rui asked, her tone light but accusatory. The guests were starting to wonder. Lea met Rui's gaze evenly. "I was just retrieving more wine. I didn't think anyone would notice." "Oh, we notice everything," Rui said, leaning in closer. "Don't forget that." Lea smiled faintly. "I wouldn't dream of it." The party wound down late into the night, the guests leaving in waves, their laughter and polite farewells echoing through the halls. Once the last car disappeared down the driveway, the house fell into an uneasy silence. Jian approached Lea, his expression unreadable. "You did well tonight," he said. "But remember, loyalty is proven over time, not in a single evening." "Understood," Lea replied, her voice steady. As Jian walked away, Lea exhaled slowly, her body tense with the effort of maintaining her facade. She knew the Min family's trust was a fragile thing, and it wouldn't take much for them to shatter it completely. Back in her room, Lea sat by the window, staring out at the darkened garden below. The moon was bright tonight, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. Her phone buzzed again, and she read the message from Detective Liao. "Received. Next phase begins tomorrow. Be prepared." Lea set the phone down, her jaw tightening. The storm she had set in motion was about to break, and she was standing at its center. For Malin, for the lives Jian and his family had ruined, she would see this through, even if it meant tearing apart the fragile balance she had managed to maintain. Chapter 16. The Storm Unleashed. The next morning arrived heavy with anticipation, the air in the Min estate feeling dense, almost suffocating. Lea rose early, her body tense and her mind racing. The message from Detective Liao the previous night had left her on edge. She had taken the first major step in dismantling the Min family's empire, but now came the most dangerous phase: waiting for the retaliation. At breakfast, the tension in the dining room was palpable. Jian sat at the head of the table, his focus sharp and unrelenting. Madame Wu exuded her usual poise, but her piercing gaze lingered on Lea longer than usual. Rui was uncharacteristically quiet, though the faint curve of her lips suggested she was savoring some unspoken plan. "You've been quite busy lately," Madame Wu said suddenly, her tone casual but her words carrying an edge. Lea looked up, meeting her gaze with a calm smile. "There's always something to do in a household like this. I try to keep things running smoothly." Madame Wu tilted her head slightly, studying her. "Yes, but I hope you're not taking on too much. It's easy to overstep when you don't fully understand the responsibilities." Lea's smile didn't falter. "I've been careful to respect the boundaries you've set." Madame Wu's lips curved faintly, though her eyes remained cold. "Good, let's keep it that way." Jian said nothing, but his silence was louder than any words. Lea felt his eyes on her, calculating and cold, as though he were dissecting her every move. As the morning passed, Lea stayed busy, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew that any sign of hesitation or unease could tip the family off to her true intentions. She worked methodically, keeping her head down while quietly preparing herself for whatever was to come. By mid-afternoon, her phone buzzed with another message from Detective Liao. "It's begun. Stay alert. We'll move soon." Her pulse quickened, but she quickly erased the message, her training kicking in. She couldn't let any trace of her communications remain. The Min family's surveillance was too thorough. That evening, the house felt different. There was a tension in the air, a quiet unease that seemed to seep into every corner. Lea noticed the staff moving more cautiously, their glances more guarded. Even Yumei, who had been her quiet ally, avoided meeting her eyes. As the family gathered in the drawing room after dinner, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Jian poured himself a drink, the sound of ice clinking against glass breaking the silence. Madame Wu sat by the fire, her posture regal, while Rui lounged nearby, her sharp gaze fixed on Lea. "We need to talk," Jian said suddenly, his voice low but commanding. Lea's heart raced, but she kept her expression calm. "Of course." Jian gestured for her to sit. She complied, her every movement measured. The firelight cast long shadows across the room, the flickering flames reflecting in Jian's dark eyes. "There have been developments," Jian began, his tone careful. "Certain people have taken an interest in our affairs." Lea tilted her head slightly, feigning curiosity. "What kind of interest?" Jian's gaze sharpened. "The wrong kind." Madame Wu leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "We've received word that someone is trying to undermine us, leaking information, betraying us." Lea's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Do you know who it is?" Jian's silence was deafening, his eyes fixed on hers. Rui smirked faintly, her expression one of triumph. "We're narrowing it down," Jian said finally. "But rest assured, when we find them, there will be consequences." Lea nodded, her voice even. "I hope you find them soon." Madame Wu studied her for a long moment before leaning back in her chair. "Yes, we will." That night, Lea couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring out at the garden below, her mind racing. The Min family was onto her, and their net was tightening. She knew it was only a matter of time before they moved against her. Her phone buzzed again, the faint light illuminating the dark room. It was Liao. "Next phase tomorrow. Be ready to leave if necessary." Lea stared at the message, her jaw tightening. Leaving would mean abandoning her position in the house, but staying too long could mean disaster. She had to weigh her options carefully. The next day, the estate erupted in chaos. Men in suits, security personnel, arrived in unmarked cars, their presence adding a new layer of tension to the household. Madame Wu orchestrated their movements with precision, issuing commands with a calm authority that belied the storm brewing beneath her surface. Jian disappeared into his office for hours, the door locked and guarded. Rui seemed to revel in the drama, her smirk growing with every passing moment. Lea moved through the house carefully, her senses heightened. She overheard fragments of conversations, words like investigation, leak, and betrayal that confirmed her worst fears. The Min family was on the warpath, and she was squarely in their sights. That evening, as the sun set and cast the estate in a fiery glow, Lea made her decision. She retrieved the essentials she had hidden away, documents, cash, a burner phone, and slipped them into a small bag. If the Min family acted against her tonight, she would be ready. She glanced at Mei Lin's photograph one last time, her daughter's smile a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. "This is for you," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. As the house fell into an uneasy silence, Lea steeled herself. The Min family's empire was beginning to crumble, and she was prepared to fight until the very end. Chapter 17: The House of Cards. The night fell heavy over the Min estate, its grandeur cloaked in shadows. Lea stood by her window, the faint light of the moon illuminating the garden below. The presence of additional security was palpable. Men patrolled the grounds, their silhouettes shifting like ghosts against the manicured hedges. Inside, the air buzzed with tension, the kind that threatened to explode at any moment. Lea glanced at her small bag, hidden beneath the bed. It contained everything she needed to make a quick escape. She had sent her final message to Detective Liao hours ago. "I'm ready. Move now, or I won't make it out." Downstairs, the drawing room was alive with murmured voices. Jian, Madame Wu, and Rui had gathered with their inner circle, the heavy scent of cigars and whiskey filling the room. Lea could hear Jian's voice, low and steady, as he issued commands. "Whoever it is, they won't get far," he said. "We've already tightened our operations. Any leaks will be shut down." Madame Wu's voice followed, sharp and cold. "We should have dealt with this sooner. Hesitation has made us vulnerable." Rui's laughter cut through the tension, light but laced with malice. "It's always the quiet ones you have to watch. Isn't that right, Lea?" Lea froze in the hallway, her heart pounding. She had expected suspicion, but Rui's words felt like a knife pressed to her throat. "Rui," Jian warned, his tone impatient. "Enough games. We don't act without proof." "And we'll have it soon," Madame Wu added. "There's no escaping us." Lea retreated to her room, her mind racing. The walls were closing in, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they acted. She retrieved her burner phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she checked for a response from Liao. A single message blinked on the screen. "We're moving. Stay put. When the signal comes, go." Hours passed, each second dragging into eternity. The house was eerily quiet now, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Lea sat on the edge of her bed, every muscle in her body taut. She replayed her escape plan over and over in her mind, each step meticulously calculated. A soft knock at the door shattered the silence. "Lea," Jian's voice called, calm but firm. "Come downstairs. We need to talk." She stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. Her mask was still intact, but she could feel the cracks beneath it. As she opened the door, she was met by Jian's cold gaze, flanked by 2 security guards. "This way," he said, gesturing for her to follow. The drawing room was dimly lit, the fire casting flickering shadows across the walls. Madame Wu sat in her usual chair, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. Rui lounged nearby, her smirk as sharp as ever. The security guards stationed themselves by the door, their presence a silent threat. Jian gestured for Lea to sit. "We've been discussing some troubling developments," he began. Lea met his gaze evenly, though her heart raced. "What kind of developments?" Madame Wu leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Someone has been leaking information about our operations. Important information. And that someone is close to us." Lea feigned surprise, her voice steady. "Do you think it's someone in the household?" Jian's jaw tightened. "We have reason to believe so, and we need to ensure everyone's loyalty." Madame Wu's gaze sharpened, starting with you. Lea's pulse quickened as Jian produced a small device, a tablet displaying surveillance footage. Her stomach dropped as she recognized herself on the screen, slipping into Jian's office, her movements quick and deliberate. "Care to explain this?" Jian asked, his voice dangerously calm. Lea's mind raced, searching for an escape. "I was organizing the documents for the family's business affairs," she said, her tone measured. "I thought it would help, but clearly I was mistaken." Rui laughed, the sound cold and biting. "How noble of you, but we're not fools, Lea." Madame Wu stood, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Enough lies. Who are you working for?" Lea's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "I'm not working for anyone. I've been loyal to this family from the start." Jian slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Then prove it. Give us the truth, or we'll find it ourselves." Before Lea could respond, a loud crash came from outside, a burst of chaos that shattered the tension. Shouts filled the air, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the ground. The Min family members froze, their faces a mix of shock and fury. "What's happening?" Rui demanded, standing abruptly. Jian grabbed his phone, barking orders into it. "Lock the house down. Find out who's here." Lea's phone buzzed in her pocket. She discreetly glanced at it. "We're in. Move now." The storm had arrived. In the chaos that followed, Lea moved quickly, her instincts taking over. She slipped away from the drawing room, her footsteps silent against the polished floors. The security guards were distracted, rushing toward the commotion outside. She retrieved her bag from her room and made her way to the hidden exit she had discovered weeks earlier, a narrow servants' passage that led to the back of the estate. The air was thick with the sounds of shouting and running, but she kept her focus, her every step calculated. As she emerged into the cool night air, she saw the flash of headlights in the distance. A car waited for her, its engine humming softly. Liao stepped out, his expression tense. "Hurry." Lea climbed into the car, her heart pounding as they sped away from the estate. The sounds of the chaos faded into the distance, replaced by the low hum of the engine and the weight of her relief. "It's done," Liao said, glancing at her. "We've got what we need to take them down. But this isn't over." Lea nodded, her mind already racing ahead. "I know, they'll come for me." Liao's expression hardened. Let them try. As the car disappeared into the night, Lea allowed herself a single, steadying breath. The Min family's empire was crumbling, but the fight was far from over. For Meilin, for herself, and for everyone the Min family had hurt, she would see this through to the end. Chapter 18. After the Escape. The hum of the car engine was the only sound as Detective Liao drove through the darkened streets, the Min estate fading into the distance. Lea sat in the passenger seat, her body tense, her mind racing. The events of the night had pushed her to the edge, but she couldn't afford to let her guard down yet. "You're safe for now," Liao said, his voice low but steady. "We've dismantled part of their network tonight, but the Min family isn't finished. They'll retaliate." Lea glanced at him, her jaw tightening. "I know. They'll come for me, and they'll use anyone they can to get to me." Liao gave her a sharp look. "Then we have to act fast. The evidence you provided was enough to implicate Jian and his associates, but Madame Wu and Rui? They'll fight harder. They'll try to clean up the mess." Lea nodded, staring out the window at the darkened city. "They'll regroup, but we've cracked their foundation, and now we have to keep applying pressure." The car pulled into a secure parking garage beneath a nondescript building. Liao led Lea inside, the air cool and sterile, the faint hum of fluorescent lights echoing off the walls. They entered a small office, its walls lined with filing cabinets and surveillance monitors. "This is our base for now," Liao said, motioning for her to sit. "You'll be safe here until we can finalize the next steps." Lea set her bag down and leaned against the table, her hands gripping the edge. "What's the next move?" Liao pulled up a chair, his expression grim. "We've frozen several of their accounts and intercepted key communications, but the Min family has deep ties to powerful people. We need more. Something that directly implicates Madame Wu and Rui." Lea thought for a moment, her mind racing through everything she had seen and heard in the estate. "There's a ledger," she said finally. Jian kept it hidden in his office. It has records of their offshore accounts and payments to key figures. If we can get it, it'll bring their entire operation down. Liao frowned. Going back there is too risky. They'll be watching for you. Lea's eyes hardened. Then we'll have to find another way. That ledger is the key to everything. The hours stretched into early morning as they planned their next steps. Liao made calls, coordinating with his team, while Lea sifted through the evidence they had already collected. The weight of the night pressed heavily on her, but she couldn't stop now. The fight wasn't just for her, it was for Meilin, for everyone the Min family had hurt. At one point, Liao brought her a cup of coffee, his expression softening slightly. "You've done more than most people would in your position," he said. "But you need to rest. This isn't a sprint, it's a marathon." Lea took the coffee, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Rest can wait. I'm not done yet." As dawn broke, Lea stepped outside onto a small balcony, the city coming to life below her. The air was crisp, the faint scent of rain lingering from the night before. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to reality. It was a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but you don't know what's coming. You're not safe." Lea's grip on the phone tightened, her jaw clenching. She knew it was a threat from the Min family, a reminder that their reach was still vast. But instead of fear, it fueled her determination. She turned back inside, her resolve hardening. "They're trying to scare me," she said to Liao, holding up the message. "But it won't work." Liao nodded, his expression grim. "Good, because this is just the beginning." By mid-morning, they had mapped out their next move. The plan was risky, but it was the only way to secure the ledger and deal the final blow to the Min family's empire. Lea would go back, but this time she wouldn't be alone. "We'll create a distraction," Liao explained, pointing to the estate's blueprints spread out on the table. "While they're focused on us, you'll get into the office and retrieve the ledger." Lea nodded, her eyes sharp. "And then we end this." As the day wore on, Lea prepared herself mentally and physically for the confrontation ahead. She knew the risks, but there was no turning back. The Min family had built their empire on fear and manipulation, and she was determined to see it crumble. As night fell, Lea stood in the dimly lit office, her hands steady as she checked her equipment one last time. Liao approached her, his expression serious but supportive. "Are you ready?" he asked. Lea looked at him, her eyes blazing with determination, more than ever. The fight wasn't over, but the end was in sight, and Lea was ready to face whatever came next. For Meilin, for justice, for freedom. Chapter 19. The Final Infiltration. The Min estate loomed ahead, its towering walls cloaked in darkness. The air was heavy with tension as Lea crouched beside Detective Liao and his team, their black tactical gear blending seamlessly into the night. The faint hum of insects was the only sound as they reviewed the final details of the plan. "This is it," Liao whispered, pointing to the estate's blueprints illuminated on a tablet. "The guards will be drawn to the north side once we create the distraction. That will give you a clear path to the office." Lea nodded, her face expressionless, but her mind razor-sharp. She had memorized every turn, every hidden passage. "And the ledger? It should still be in the hidden compartment in Jian's desk," Liao replied. "If it's moved, you'll need to improvise." Lea exhaled slowly, her determination settling over her like armor. "I'll get it. Just make sure the distraction holds." Liao gave her a firm look. "You'll have 5 minutes. If you're not out by then, we'll come in." The signal came with the distant sound of an explosion, a controlled detonation near the estate's northern boundary. The muffled shouts of guards and the pounding of boots followed as the estate's security forces scrambled toward the chaos. Lea slipped through a hidden side gate, her every movement silent and precise. The garden was eerily still, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air. She moved quickly, her steps light on the gravel path. The estate's opulence was muted in the dim light, but its looming presence was as suffocating as ever. Reaching the back entrance, Lea entered the house, the cold marble floor chilling beneath her feet. The hallway was empty, the guards having been drawn away, but she knew better than to let her guard down. Jian's office was exactly as she had left it the last time she was there. The faint scent of tobacco still clung to the air, and the room was cloaked in shadows. Lea moved to the desk, her fingers tracing the edges of the hidden compartment. Her heart raced as she found the latch and pulled it open. The ledger was still there, its worn leather cover hiding the secrets that could bring the Min family down. She slipped it into her bag, her hands trembling slightly as the weight of her mission pressed against her. Just as she was about to leave, a faint sound made her freeze, a creak of a floorboard just outside the door. Lea's breath caught, her pulse pounding in her ears. She quickly extinguished her flashlight and pressed herself into the shadows. The door creaked open, and Jian stepped inside, his silhouette sharp against the faint light from the hallway. He moved toward the desk, his movements deliberate, his presence filling the room with an oppressive weight. "Lea," he said softly, his voice like a blade in the darkness. "I know you're here." She stayed silent, her every muscle tense as she calculated her next move. "You've been clever," Jian continued, his tone calm but menacing. "But did you really think you could outsmart me?" Lea's mind raced. She couldn't fight him directly. Not here, not now. She needed a distraction. Her fingers found a small glass paperweight on the desk. With precise aim, she threw it across the room, shattering a lamp in the corner. As Jian turned toward the noise, she slipped out of the room, her footsteps silent as she moved down the hallway. The estate was alive with movement now, the guards scrambling to secure the premises. Lea moved quickly, her path to the exit clear in her mind. The ledger felt heavy in her bag, but it was a weight she was willing to bear. As she reached the garden, a shout rang out behind her. "Stop her!" Lea sprinted, her breaths sharp and fast, the sound of boots pounding behind her. The gate was just ahead, and beyond it, she could see the faint outline of Liao and his team. A gunshot rang out, the sound splitting the night. Lea ducked instinctively, her heart racing as she pushed herself harder. The gate loomed closer, and with one final burst of energy, she slipped through. Liao pulled her behind the cover of a parked car, his expression a mix of relief and urgency. "You've got it?" Lea nodded, pulling the ledger from her bag. "It's all here." Liao's team moved swiftly, securing their position as more vehicles arrived to reinforce them. The Min estate was in chaos, and Lea knew this was just the beginning of the family's downfall. As they drove away from the estate, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving Lea drained but resolute. Liao glanced at her from the driver's seat, his expression serious. "You did it," he said. "This will bring them down." Lea nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's not over yet. They'll fight back." Liao's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Then we'll be ready." Later, in the safety of the secure location, Lea sat alone with the ledger, flipping through its pages. The names, the transactions, the web of corruption, it was all there. She thought of Maylin, her daughter's innocent smile, a reminder of why she had risked everything. She closed the ledger, her resolve hardening. The Min family's empire was crumbling, but she wouldn't rest until it was destroyed entirely. For Maylin, for justice, for freedom. Chapter 20. Freedom's Dawn. The next morning dawned with a grey, muted light that matched Lea's exhaustion. She had spent the night poring over the ledger with Detective Liao and his team, meticulously tying the names and transactions to the Min family's sprawling network of crime. The weight of what they had uncovered was staggering. It wasn't just about smuggling and bribery. It was about lives destroyed, families torn apart by the Min family's greed and ruthlessness. But now, for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Liao entered the room, his expression tense but determined. "It's done," he said, holding up a tablet. "The arrest warrants are ready. Madame Wu, Jian, Rui, and several of their top associates, this ends today." Lea straightened, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What's the plan?" "We've coordinated with the authorities. Teams are already in place at the estate and their key hideouts. It's a simultaneous strike. No one escapes," Liao replied. Lea nodded, her jaw tightening. "And what about me? They'll know I'm behind this." Liao's gaze softened slightly. "We'll protect you. But Lea, you need to be ready. They'll come after you, even from behind bars." She met his eyes, her voice steady. "Let them try." The operation began just as the sun broke through the clouds, casting the city in golden light. Lea stayed at the secure location, watching the events unfold on a monitor. The tactical teams moved with precision. breaching the gates of the Min estate and swarming through its grand halls. The shouts of officers and the muffled sounds of protests from the family filled the air. Jian was the first to be taken, his composure cracking as he was handcuffed and dragged out of the house. Madame Wu followed, her regal facade still intact as she glared at the officers with icy disdain. Rui screamed and fought as they restrained her, her sharp words echoing through the halls like a final desperate act of defiance. "They're all in custody," Liao confirmed over the radio. "No casualties. The estate is secure." Lea exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as the tension began to release. It was over. The Min family's reign of terror had finally come to an end. Later that day, Liao escorted Lea to a safe house on the outskirts of the city. It was small and unassuming, surrounded by lush greenery and the sound of birdsong. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. As she stepped inside, she saw Maylin waiting for her, her bright eyes lighting up when she saw her mother. "Mama," she cried, running into Lea's arms. Lea dropped to her knees, wrapping her daughter in a fierce embrace. The scent of Maylin's hair, the warmth of her tiny arms, it was a balm to her soul. "I missed you so much," Lea whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I missed you too," Maylin said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. That evening, Lea sat on the small porch of the safe house, Maylin playing with a toy nearby. Liao joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "You did something incredible, Lea," he said. "The Min family's empire is dismantled, their resources frozen, and their associates are turning on them. It's over." Lea nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "For now, but I know their reach doesn't end with them. There are others, other families, other networks. I can't rest completely," Liao sighed. "You've done more than enough. Let us handle the rest. You need to heal. You need to give Maylin the life she deserves." Lea glanced at her daughter, who was humming softly to herself, oblivious to the weight her mother had carried for so long. "She deserves a future free from fear," Lea said quietly. "And I'll do everything to make sure she has it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Lea allowed herself a moment of stillness. The fight had cost her so much, but it had also given her something priceless: freedom. For herself, for Maylin, and for the people who had suffered under the Min family's grip. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, Lea felt ready to walk it. She held her daughter close, her heart full of quiet determination. Together, they would build a new life, one filled with hope, strength, and the promise of a brighter future. The storm had passed, and for Lea and Maylin, the dawn had finally arrived.